Good day. I would like to begin by stating that in making this video, I try to explain what happened and the reasons why it happened to my late wife Jacqueline and to me in the days and months following the admission to the University Hospital in Durham for surgery after my wife fractured her hip in the fall in early May last year. You may consider me to be an angry, bitter man for my words and opinions. Unfortunately, over a year after my wife's death, you may well be right. As I stare at the University Hospital of North Durham's website and read the statement of virtues, which reads safe, compassionate, joined-up care, as published on that website, I simply shake my head in sadness and in silent despair. My name is Mike Cunningham, and my wife's name was Jacqueline Billy Cunningham. We married in 1967, some 53 years ago. Confined to her bed in the last decade of her life, as she was unable to walk or indeed stand upright as one result of her illness, I was privileged to look after her every need. The morning of her accident, I had brought her up a drink to her bedside as she could sit up, but as I was drinking my own tea, she fell from her bedside, and when the ambulance crew arrived, they confirmed that she was in considerable pain and so was transferred to the emergency department at the hospital. After x-rays were taken, a young female doctor explained that an operation was needed to reduce and repair the fracture to her hip. The doctor did indeed explain that there were worries as my wife was very frail and might not survive the shock of the anaesthetic needed, but the alternative, which was long-term nursing while the fracture repaired itself, would indeed be troubling for my wife. I would stress that nothing else was ever mentioned as a factor in the proposed operation for my beloved. Later in the evening, this hospital bloke phoned me, a husband worried sick over his wife's stay in hospital, and commenced a short monologue about how some people didn't last very long after resuscitation and how their life quality was poor. Nothing else was mentioned, no acronyms, nothing about how some secretive medical professionals would decide whether my wife lived or died. Nothing. As I discovered later, this was the hospital's version of discussing with me, as Jacqueline's husband and legal trustee, the hospital's intention to place a DNAR notice upon my wife's bedside file. I was called the next afternoon and told that Jacqueline's operation had been successful. She had recovered consciousness, had a drink, and was resting. I was phoned later in the evening and was bluntly informed that my wife had died after a heart attack. She was the mother of my kids, now all grown up and away. She was my companion, my love, and my life. I will admit that I have never experienced such grief, such emotion. The effects almost broke me, but I survived. I survived by remorselessly concentrating on completion of all the minor items needed to wind up the ephemera of a digital life. I arranged for Jackie's cremation. I even located a photo of my wife, which depicted her in the manner in which I wished to remember her, not as the frail lady which she had become over those years. I eventually pulled myself from the abyss of grief into which I had descended, and prepared to go on living, but now alone. As my wife had died unexpectedly, I was told that the coroner would be authorising an inquest, and I was asked if I wished to be copied with the record of hospital documents of my wife's brief stay in that Durham City Hospital. I agreed, But upon receipt of those emailed hospital documents, I discovered that in the official hospital notification to the coroner, the statements included the words, "The patient's next of kin was contacted by the orthopaedic registrar and explained the plan for surgery." The registrar also discussed the high risk of the procedure due to the patient's frailty and the decision to place a DNAR in situ. Do not attempt resuscitation. The husband agreed for the surgery as well as the decision to put a DNAR in place. The words which I had stated that I had agreed for the surgery were absolutely correct, as I had had that discussion with the young female doctor in the emergency rooms. But the remainder of those sentences were an absolute lie. Not only was I never informed or agreed that a DNAR, do not attempt resuscitation, notice should be placed upon the bedside file of my wife of some 53 years of marriage, but anyone who knows anything about me as Jackie's husband would know that I would never ever agree to such a document being issued, a lawful document which states that in the event of a heart attack, no further action, no shock treatment, no medication, no drugs, nothing should be done to help prolong my wife's life. My whole tenuous shell of normality was shattered, as I had to relive the loss of my wife, a loss which was made 1,000 times worse by my discovery that Jacqueline died because the decision had been made that she should be cast away onto a medical scrap heap, that she should not survive because a medical professional decided so, that she should be left to die because of her frailty or of a mental illness. If you searched, as I did, through the published NHS policy documents on the specific subject of the authorization of a do not attempt cardiopulmonary resuscitation, you will find many paragraphs dictating which team is responsible for any procedure, how such procedures are carried out, but strangely absent from all the many paragraphs and documents are the terms such as compassion, sympathy, empathy, or indeed true humanity. Not much safe, compassionate, joined-up care as far as this widower is concerned. The main document by which NHS medical professionals, consultants and others judge and decide whether a patient lives or dies holds headings such as "Frailty predicts futility." And this is where I found the real engine behind the hidden actions of supposedly humane medical professionals. They use statistics, bloody statistics, possibilities, theoretical outcomes, evidence of frailty to determine whether my beloved wife of 53 years of marriage was to be given all available medical help in the possibility of a heart attack, or, as was the case, to be left to slowly die without even the comforting hand of her husband to sustain her as she passed. I know that my wife was frail. After 10 years of nursing her, I was intimately familiar with her body. Anyone who visited or knew her could make that judgment. But I placed my trust in the university hospital orthopaedic team so that she might have her hip repaired and then, after a period of recuperation, be sent home to her husband. As I wrote to the coroner, if I had been approached honestly and without guile, and advised that it would be in Jacqueline's best interests to withhold resuscitation, I would have listened. I would probably have told this medical practitioner that all steps to save my wife's life must be taken. If such efforts failed, so be it, but at least my wife would have been given the chance. During my lengthy correspondence with the hospital and trust, I received many expressions of condolence and of regret at the manner in which Jacqueline and myself were treated. But, and there has to be a but, as I discovered such words had a truly hollow, empty ring. In ending, I would repeat the words which I spoke at Jacqueline's cremation. I find that I have to look back upon our lives together in so short a time scale. A swift glance over 53 years together in but a few sentences. I am reliably informed that 1 second is equal to 186,400ths of a mean solar day. I remember that on that evening in the Empire Ballroom in Leicester Square, some 55 odd years ago, it was within only 10 of those precious seconds of meeting Jacqueline that I determined that I had met the woman with whom I wished to spend the rest of my life. Some 3 odd weeks after we first met, I flew out towards Hong Kong to join a British Merchant Navy ship because I had signed as an engineer on that dotted line. I must have impressed Jacqueline in some way because we wrote to each other continually for all of those 13 months, and she was waiting for me when I flew back. I persuaded the owner of those sparkling eyes, whose voice had cut-glass diction, to marry me. We emigrated to South Africa, and our 3 children were born there. A mental illness took some of that sparkle from my Jacqueline's eyes, but with care and love, we walked, stumbled and managed together for the remaining decades of our lives. She sometimes even smiled at my jokes, long after my kids just raised their eyebrows at the repeats. People have sometimes said how they admire me because I looked after my Jacqueline after she lost her mobility and abilities. Myself, as I have maybe said before, I don't consider myself to be anything more than a grumpy old man who keeps the promises he made while standing beside his brand new wife some 53 years ago. Farewell, my Jacqueline.